Oo, pwede kayo mag-ask sa akin. Under kayo sa akin? Ay, hindi pala kayo under sa akin. Akala ko under ko kayo sa akin. You can send a chat message sa akin, class, and I'll try to reply as fast as possible. Sometimes, medyo busy din ang life. Pero mag-reply ako. pawait na lang ha kung matagal ako mag-reply. Magre-reply ako. Tapos kung na-open ko yung message ninyo, tapos hindi na ako nakapag-reply, meaning na na-open ko lang siya, tapos nakalimutan ko na. Okay? So, okay lang din. I-ano nyo lang ako, i-follow up nyo lang ako if ever may message kayo sa akin na nakalimutan kong i-answer. Nakalimut na dyan ko, anak, class, honestly. Kapag na-open ko siya, tapos hindi ako nakapag-reply. Maybe during that time, I was doing something. So most of the time, kasi kapag I am doing something and then nakita ko may message, kapag I'm not yet ready to answer, hindi ko talaga yan siya ino-open para hindi ko siya makalimutan, hindi siya mabaon. Okay? Again, just send a message sa akin. Yung mga under sa akin, you can book consultation this weekend until next week. Wala tayong pasok. Okay, so for the recorded video, we started with the research methodology already. This is the first part, the research design. So it can be quali, quanti, or mixed method. For the group of Florence, that will be a systematic review. I think that will be just a systematic review. You will not be doing meta-analysis. You just place there systematic review and you discuss what a systematic review is. That will be your research design. So this afternoon, let's continue with the quantitative research design, specifically our experimental, kasi we also have a lot of groups here. We'll be doing an experimental research, and then after that, we'll discuss what a mixed method is, and then we will move on to other parts or other subsections of the methodology. We have the research local, the population and sample, or let's just call it sampling techniques, and yung other parts na the research protocol, though I cannot really discuss the research protocol because you have different procedures. Iba-iba yung procedures na kasi iba-iba yung study ninyo. But nevertheless, I'll just give you an outline. How are you going to do the research protocols? And then the ethical considerations and the statistical treatment. Sa finals, we will have a separate discussion about statistical treatment. We will just have a review about your statistics class. Diba? I was your teacher sa statistics. I was able to discuss like p-test, and then yung sa correlation natin, sa ANOVA. I-review natin yun siya so that you will be able to apply that in your research. And by the time you have collected your data already, you will know how to process your data. And that way you can save money kasi you may also not hire as a statistician anymore if you know how to process your data. That is true for quantitative research. Yung systematic review kasi, it's more on the linguistic data, so you will not be doing statistical treatment. Okay, so let's continue. I'll be skipping these parts here kasi this is already in the recorded video. I hope you watched it para na-explain yung mga what is in the PPT. Okay, so I think the video ended with the descriptive researches here sa follow-up studies. So let's start with the experimental research design. So when you say experimental research design, this is future-oriented class. So definitely we will be doing the observation first or even the experimentation for us to know whether the substance that we are investigating is effective or not. So we are concerned here about the word efficacy or effectiveness. We are going to test whether our independent variable is effective to our dependent variable. That's what we are doing with the experimental research. So remember, our independent variable is our predictor variable. We are going to manipulate it in our study. We may even control it. We can control what part of the plant are we going to use, or what dose are we going to administer. Okay, and then we can even manipulate what positive control or negative control are we going to use in our study for the basis of comparison. And then the dependent variable is our outcome variable. Okay, so we have hypothesis here for experimental research. We have our like tentative solution to our problem. We will be proposing a solution to our problem, and that we are going to do series of testings for us to have a conclusion whether our proposed solution is effective or not. Okay, so again, when you say experimental research, this one is objective ha, unlike our qualitative research na we have linguistic data, and when we are going to analyze our linguistic data, we may not be we may not be objective. Most of the time we will be subjective in the analysis kasi we will be doing the interpretation based on what we have understood or how do we perceive our collected data. So more on subjective yung ating qualitative na research. This time, this will be objective. This will be based on scientific principles and procedures. And definitely we will be systematic here. We will be following series of stages or phases in the experimentation. And we will be controlling some variables. Like for example, in our experimental group wherein we are going to administer to our laboratory animals our plant material, we can control what part are we going to use, and we can control the dose. Even the dose can be controlled, and then the positive control also, i-control natin no, in terms of what agent are we going to use for comparison. And then we also for our experimental research, the most important thing is the establishment of the cause and effect relationship. Ito talaga ang ini-establish natin. Whether one substance is like effective to another substance. That is, we have the cause here, and then afterwards, the effect. Now, what are the disadvantages of doing an experimental research? Number one talaga is artificiality. We don't test things in its natural setting or in their natural settings. So just like when we have our plant material, we test it not in human subjects kasi that will be unethical for us to do, but we use most of the time laboratory animals, okay, artificial. And some of you will be doing your experimentation in vitro, okay? So you will just be using laboratory apparatus or laboratory equipment for you to test the efficacy or effectiveness of your plant material. We are not going to directly give our plant material to human subjects. Again, that will be unethical. So papasok dyan yung unethical na disadvantage natin. However, even if we are going to use laboratory animals, that is still unethical because even animals have rights. So as much as possible, if we're going to use them in our experiment, we have to lessen the pain that they may feel. Kung hindi man natin mawala yung pain talaga, no? At least we lessen it. And for those who will be inducing diseases, for example, in your research, kailangan gawin nating diabetic yung daga natin, then we are going to do euthanasia at the end of our study. Meaning we are really going to kill them kasi they will just suffer if we'll let them live after the experimentation tapos meron na silang sakit. And then another thing that is not really good about experimental research is its feasibility. Sometimes we will encounter problems with the availability of the equipment in the laboratory or the chemicals that we are going to use. And then at the same time, doing experimental research entails cost, budget. Minsan may problema tayo dyan. Baka hindi natin kaya yung cost ng experimentation or feasibility in terms of our capability as researchers, kasi sometimes we don't know what to do, especially if we don't really have a background in doing that certain experimental procedure. But nevertheless, when it comes to the procedure, if all the things are just available, pwede natin pag-aralan. Okay? Para alam natin yung gagawin natin with our research. Now, the simplest experimental design includes this one. At least two variables. We really have to identify our independent variables and the dependent variables. So we should know what are we going to manipulate or control in our study. And at the same time, we should know the expected outcome. And that is the dependent variable. And the simplest experimental research also have two groups of participants, at least two groups. But in our institution, we have three groups of participants. Ano yung three groups sa institution natin, sa school natin? Siyempre, the experimental group, it's the group of the participants that will receive the intervention that we are proposing. So most of the time, it will be the plant material. Okay? Plant material natin yan, experimental group. So if we have laboratory animals, we will have one group that will receive the plant material. And then we have another group. The second group is our positive control. This group of animals class will receive naman the agent that is expected to cause that certain outcome. Meaning, it's the drug that is already proven in the market. It's out in the market already and ginagamit natin talaga siya for that certain condition. Just like when your studies about diabetes, example, we are going to use metformin as our positive control. So metformin is an oral hypoglycemic agent. So it's really expected to cause lowering in the blood sugar level. And then the last group in the institution, kasi sa simplest experimental design, two groups lang siya mostly, experimental tapos control. Sa atin, dalawa yung control natin. Aside from the positive control, we also have our negative control. So most of the time we use distilled water kasi distilled water does not really cause these outcomes in the lab. Like when you say decrease in the blood sugar level, we don't expect the distilled water to do that. Okay, or to cause that one. So we call that negative control. So those studies na experimental in nature, please identify your groups ngayon, kung ano ba yung groups niyo sa research. Siyempre, you have your treatment group or experimental group and you have to identify also your control. Positive and negative. Now, how do you identify the positive control that you are going to use? For example, your condition is diabetes. So we will be expecting a lowering in the blood sugar. But you actually have your experience in the community pharmacy, right? And in there, you have encountered that we have a lot of drugs for diabetes, not just metformin. We also have glibenclamide, glimepiride. What else? We also have acarbose. Those are examples of drugs for diabetes. No? Now, how are we going to select that? Okay, plus those groups with experimental research. What you're going to do is to research, okay? Research first what is in your plant material that will most likely be the reason why it can be a potential drug for that certain disease. You have your pharmacognosy ngayon, diba? So sa pharmacognosy, you have learned the different phytochemicals like alkaloids, glycosides, flavonoids, mga volatile oils. Yan yung mga examples of mga tannins, yan yung mga phytochems natin. So hanapin nyo in the phytochemicals of the plant kung alin doon yung magkakos ng action. If your study is about uric acid lowering, alin doon yung nagpapalower ng uric acid. Ano pa yung study niyo? Hindi ko maalala yung mga studies ninyo. What else? Pediculicide. I think we have study about pediculicide or anthelmintic. I cannot remember. I'm so sorry. But nevertheless, kapag ka ganun, example, pediculicide, hanapin nyo, alin doon sa mga phytochemicals can kill the lice. Okay? Tapos, after that, pag na-identify nyo na, you also research for the mechanism of action. Okay? So, example, the one that causes death in the lice is flavonoids. Example lang ito ha, hindi ako sure nito. Flavonoids. So, hanapin nyo ngayon, i-research nyo ngayon, paano how these flavonoids class kill the lice. Tapos, pag nahanap nyo na yung mechanism of action, that's the time, hanap kayo ng existing drug in the market that has the same mechanism of action with that of your plant material. Okay, that's how we decide what positive control are we going to use in your study. Okay, I hope that is clear. Do you have questions or clarifications? Baka kasi natapos na ang study, nag-proposal na tayo, tapos dito pa ma-question ang inyong positive control sa proposal defense. Kasi tatanungin talaga yan ng panel, bakit yan ang inyong positive control? That's how you are going to answer. Because ito yung phytochem ng plant namin, and ito yung mechanism of action, and yes, magkapareha sila ng mechanism of action ng aming plant material. Okay, kasi we have to consider that one. Dapat magkaparehas talaga sila ng mechanism of action para walang bias, walang variations in the study. Okay? Wala pangutana, sure na yun na. Natulog rin ni sila din. Nangugat-ngugat na din i-explain. Tapos natulog na mga estudyante. Hindi pa mo class. Wala pangutana, sure na yun. Sure, habang tabi ito ng mga nag-experimental research din. Ha? Diba? Well, wala, Jod. Sige, let's continue. So let's talk about the characteristics of our experimental research. Siyempre, numeric. Most of the time, our results here will be numeric. Just like when you have your study about blood sugar level, you will really have numbers for the blood sugar level of the mice. Okay, and this one caters to sophisticated statistical design. So how are we going to analyze the numerical data that we have collected? Siyempre, we will be using statistics. Okay, again, for the analysis and interpretation of our data. And usually, we are just limited to small samples, unlike our descriptive studies wherein we are going to do surveys sa maraming tao. Okay? Daghan ang atong iba-answer sa atong questionnaire. That's for the descriptive na study. But in the case of experimental research, example, we are just going to use laboratory animals, we will just have to limit the number. So most of the time, that will be 3 mice per treatment group. Example, tatlong daga doon sa positive control, 3 daga din yung gagamitin natin doon sa treatment group or sa experimental group, and another 3 mice para sa ating negative control. So that is our minimum tatlong trials. Okay? And this is labor intensive. Remember, we are going to do experimental procedure. So you really have to give effort for this one aside from money. Ang effort niya talaga dito sa conduct ng experiment. But this is actually fulfilling as pharmacy students. Fulfilling kapag your study is experimental, drug discovery. Okay? Sige. So these are class, the things that you need to fulfill for you to be able to call your study a true experimental research study or research design. Number one, you have to do manipulation. I have told you already what are you going to manipulate a while ago, and at the same time what you are going to control. But I want to give emphasis here for randomization. Remember, class, di ba, you will be grouping your subjects into at least 3 groups sa institution natin, positive, negative, and the treatment group. So, if you are going to assign your laboratory animals or your samples or your subjects in these groups, you really have to do that in random order, okay? Random. Hindi dapat siya bias or hindi dapat na ikaw lang, gusto ko itong malapit sa akin na mga daga, dapat dito sila sa positive control. Hindi ganon yung randomization, okay? We do randomization to minimize bias and sources of error. I will teach you, if I still have time later, I will teach you how to do the randomization. Okay? So we have here an example of an experimental research class. We have here a medical doctor that would like to introduce a new drug for typhoid fever. What's the cause of typhoid fever? Salmonella? Please review your microbiome. I cannot remember what's the cause of typhoid fever. Nakalimot na ko. But anyway, we are here proposing a drug for typhoid fever. And then in this case, we will just have 2 groups of participants. One group will receive the new drug, yung pinopropose niya na drug for typhoid fever. And then the other group of participants will receive the existing, so positive control sila. They will receive the existing drug for typhoid fever. So he will do the testing, and yes, at the end of the experiment, he will have a conclusion whether his proposed drug is effective or not based on its comparison to the existing drug. Kasi ang existing drug, talagang proven na siya na effective. Na pag kinumpare mo yung activity ng new drug doon sa existing drug, tapos magkapareho sila, that means your new drug is effective. Okay? Now, let's talk about the different experimental designs, just like our descriptive research class. Bang descriptive research, meron tayong klase-klase correlational, follow-up studies, evaluation, comparative, merong mga subtypes. Ganon din yung ating experimental research design. And when you are going to make your methodology, kailangan maging specific kayo with this one. Hindi lang basta-basta na pagtanungin kayo ng panelist na what is your research design, sasagutin nyo lang na true experimental. You really have to be specific on what type of experimental research design are you using. So meron tayong first pre-experimental designs. These are not actually true experimental designs, but you may choose one from the following depending on the design of your research. Pero again kapag ganito yung design ninyo, hindi mo siya pwedeng tawagin na true experimental. Okay, kasi may itong tatlong sinabi ko, ito, manipulation, control, and randomization, hindi yan siya na-satisfy dito sa pre-experimental designs. So, isa-isahin natin sila starting with the one-shot case study. So, number 1, one-shot case study lang siya. You will just have one group of participants for this or one group of subjects. Wala kang control, walang negative control, walang positive control. So hindi yun na-satisfy yung control na tinatawag na sa requirement. So ang gagawin mo sa one group of subject or participants mo, bibigyan mo na kaagad ng treatment. Kung ano man yung ibibigay mo na treatment sa kanya. Tapos after that, you will be doing a post-test. Iti-check mo kung may effect ba yung treatment doon sa subject, sa samples, or sa participants mo. But take note, we don't have a control here, and that is one of the reasons why we cannot call the one-shot case study as a true experimental design. Okay? And then we have another one here for our pre-experimental research design, the single group pre and post test. So just like the previous one, the one-shot case study, you will also have one group of participants for this. But what is the difference? Before giving the treatment, you will first do a pre-test. Okay, pre-test ka muna. Example, if this is about blood glucose level or blood sugar level, mag-pre-test ka muna. I-check mo muna kung ano yung blood sugar level ng iyong participants or yung subjects mo or yung laboratory animals mo. Tapos, after that, you give your treatment. Pagbigay mo ng treatment, magpo-post test ka after. So, i-check mo na naman yung dugo kung ano na nangyari sa blood sugar level niya after the treatment. That is what you call pre-test and post-test. But this is just single group. So, isang grupo lang, wala pa ring control. So, you cannot still call this as a true experimental research design. So, let me I'll just plug this one. Okay. Do you have questions, class, about this? Wala. Sure na? Okay. Sige, kung wala ha. Bito ni sila ha. Kasi siguro kung explain dito so wala talaga sinabot na itong research design. I hope during the defense, everybody really knows by heart what your research design is, and all the members of the group will be able to explain what your research design is. Kasi itatanong talaga yan siya ng panel sa inyo, hindi papa-explain, and it will be random. So kung sino lang yung maisipan ng panel na tatanungin. So I hope everyone knows this by heart. Okay? Now, what's the next one? The static group comparison. This time, class, we will have two groups. Okay? We will have two groups of participants. I did not bring my pen. Okay, so this is one group here and this is another group here. This one group here will receive the treatment, while the other one, there is no treatment. So like they don't have knowledge about the treatment or they don't have experience about the treatment class. But after that, after receiving the treatment, ito walang treatment, we will be doing the post-test. And then we will be comparing the results of the two. Okay, just to establish if the treatment is effective or not. But why can't we call this a true experimental research design? Na dalawang grupo naman. What is missing here is the randomization. If we don't do randomization with our subjects, like we just assign them based on our wants or our yung gusto natin na ito, member ito ng group 1, sila magre-receive ng treatment, hindi talaga siya pwedeng tawagin true experimental research design. So ano lang siya? Static group comparison, which is under the pre-experimental research design. Okay? And then lastly, we have the parallel equated two-group design. You still have experimental and your control group here. And what is their difference with the static group? Remember, sa static group, you only have the treatment and then afterwards the post-test. This time, for the parallel equated two-group design, you will be doing the pre-test first before giving the treatment. So the treatment can be your investigational drug, and then the other one will be the traditional method. The traditional method may be the positive control. Tapos after that, you will be doing the post-test. Okay? And then after that, we will be comparing the results. Kung may pagbabago ba or wala, and may difference ba yung result ng experimental group and ng control group. Okay? Sige, so that's it for the pre-experimental research design. Again, they are not included in the true experimental. They are still experimental research design pero hindi true. Kasi pag hindi yan siya true class, yung parang level niya sa research, hindi talaga mataas and it cannot really be accepted as an evidence for the efficacy of the drug. So if we're doing an experimental research, we have to make sure that it is true experimental design. Okay, so we only have 3 here for our true experimental research design. We have the pre and post-test control group, Solomon 4 group design, the post-test only and the post-test control group design. Let's start with the pre and post-test control group. So pwede kang may dalawang grupo dito, pwede din namang tatlo if you want to add a negative control. But what is like i-delete natin ito. What is class new here compared to the pre-experimental research design is this. As you can see, you have here randomization, meaning your subjects will be assigned in each group randomly. Okay, you really have to give equal chance to all the members of the population or to your all samples na ma-select sila or mag-group sila in that certain group. Okay, I'll teach you later how are you going to do the randomization. Tapos, you will have the pre-test kasi pre and post-test ito. Check mo muna. Kung example, this is a drug for the blood pressure, lowering of the blood pressure, mag-check ka muna, that's the pre-test. Check mo muna kung ano yung blood pressure nila. Kung confirmed na it's mataas, it's high, then we will give the treatment. So we have here X for the treatment. Pwede ding wala dito ha, pwedeng walang treatment dito, or pwede ding may treatment naman, pero it may be a positive control or pwedeng negative control. After that, after giving the treatments class, we will be doing the post-test. Okay? So when you say post-test, after the treatment, you will again measure the blood pressure if bumaba ba siya talaga or hindi. That's the time we may check na your treatment is effective or not. So again, it's called pre and post-test control group. Again, this is under true experimental research design. And then among the true experimental research design, this one is the most sophisticated one. And this is actually the best research design for experimental researches. So from the name itself, Solomon 4 group design, you will have 4 groups of participants, and then the participants or the subjects assigned here will be in random, okay? Random mo silang i-assign dito. Tapos, the first group class, we will be having a pre-test first. Magpa-pre-test ka muna sa first group mo. Tapos, bibigyan mo siya ng treatment and then post-test follows after. Now, yung second group of participants or sample mo will have the pre-test, but after the pre-test, you will not give any treatment. Okay? You will not be giving your plant material, for example, but you will be doing the post-test. Okay? And then for the third group, you will not be doing a pre-test. Diretso kang magbibigay ng treatment, and then you will just be doing the post-test. Okay? And lastly, for the fourth group, no pre-test, no treatment also, but diretso ka with the post-test. Okay? So this is the most sophisticated experimental research design. You will really have a conclusion after the experiment whether your substance is, or your agent or your plant material is effective or not. You will get rid of the variable. Imagine, may grupo kang nag-pre-test ka pero wala siyang treatment, nag-post-test ka na after. May grupo ka ding walang pre-test, nagbigay ka ng treatment tapos nag-post-test ka after. So you will really have a lot of discussion about the effect of the agent here or your proposed like drug or plant material. Okay? Sige, questions? before tayo mag-move on sa post-test only control group, this is the last research design for the true experimental study. Wala. Lorna, may hapon naman siguro ni sila din. Okay, wala ha. Sige, assume dyan kung nagkasinabutan na. Okay, sige. Let's have the post-test only control group. So as you can see, you will still have at least 2 groups here. Pwedeng tatlo din ha kung mag-positive and negative control ka. But what is different here from the first one, from the first research design, is you will not be doing the pre-test. Okay, you will still be doing the random assignment. The other group will be receiving the treatment. The other group will not be receiving the treatment, or pwedeng mag-receive siya pero pwedeng positive control or negative control. But after that, you will be doing the post-test. Okay, so ang nawala lang dito class ay ang pre-test. Kasi minsan may mga procedure talaga tayong hindi applicable ang pre-test. For example, your study is pediculicide. Wala kang pre-test na magagawa doon sa pediculicide. Ano gagawin niyo sa pediculicide? You will have Petri dishes. Tapos, lagay niyo yung photo dito. Lagay niyo ang photo dyan. Okay. Tapos, before ka mag-administer ng treatment ng plant material mo, wala ka kasing test na pwedeng magawa. So, ang talagang gagawin lang, after malagay ang photo dyan, lagay mo na yung treatment mo. Dito, plant material. Plant mo dito. Yung isang Petri dish, ang ilagay mo is yung positive control mo. Tapos dito, negative control. Example, water lang. Tapos, pagkatapos mo malagay ang treatment, magpo-post-test ka na diretso. And when I say post-test, maghihintay ka ngayon kung kailan namatay yung mga kuto dyan. So, post-test lang talaga. Hindi ka pwedeng mag-pre-test. Kaya meron din tayong true experimental research na post-test lang talaga ang pwede mong magawa. Okay? So, depende yan siya sa research, ha? Kasi yung iba, like yung mga blood glucose lowering, yung mga blood pressure lowering, pwede kang mag-pre-test. Kasi pwede mong ma-measure yung kanilang blood sugar o kaya yung kanilang blood pressure before giving the treatment. Ito kasi hindi. Paano mo pa mabibigyan ng treatment kung pinatay mo na sila at the start? So, yun yung ating outcome, mamamatay sila after. So, post-test lang talaga. Okay? Okay, sige, copy, Sandra. Okay, so next we have the quasi-experimental design. From the name itself, quasi, this is false or like this is fake. This is not really an experimental design. Kaya siya tinawag na quasi. So, anong example ng quasi-experimental design? If you're just doing a time series experiment, you don't have randomization, wala kang control. So, isa lang talaga class yung iyong group. So, yung sa kuto kanina, pwede yun siya mag-time series. Pero, mas maganda talaga kung true experimental, ha? Na ay, wait na, i-erase ko muna. Ayan, mas maganda talaga kung true experimental. So, gamit na lang kayo ng positive and negative control, mag-randomization din kayo, and then after the post-test. Kasi kung ang kuto is just quasi-experimental design lang siya, lagay mo dyan sa Petri dish yung mga kuto mo, tapos idiretso mong lagay yung treatment. Tapos ang time series, meaning magme-measure ka after 1 hour, ilang kuto na yung namatay, after 2 hours, ilang kuto na again yung namatay, 3, and then hangtod pila ka oras, example up to 24 hours. Time series lang siya. So this is not a true experimental research design. You are doing an experiment pero you don't have randomization and then you don't have controls. So, kung hindi yun siya na-satisfy, hindi siya true experimental. Pero may gumagawa talaga nitong time series experiments class. Okay? Parang yung brine shrimp lethality test, I don't know if you have merong mga gumagawa niyan sa high school, sa senior high. yung brine shrimp na testing. That is actually a cytotoxicity testing, no, para malaman natin whether your plant material is toxic or not based on the brine shrimp na mamamatay. Tama? Lalagay mo siya, for example, in a beaker or whatever, kung ano yung ginamit niyo in the experiment, pwede ding Petri dish. So you'll have a certain amount of brine shrimp. Tapos ilalagay mo yung plant material mo and then magta-time series ka lang. Like after 1 hour, ilang brine shrimp na yung namatay, ilang brine shrimp yung nag-survive. So yung part na yon is just quasi-experimental, 'di ba? Wala kang positive control, wala kang negative control. Okay? So I hope na intindihan yon. Questions before tayo mag-mixed method researches? Wala. Sure. Let's take a break. It's actually 5:30. 2 hours man yung class natin, no? Okay. Sige. So we have here class, the mixed method researches. Pwede din naman nating ipagsama si quali and si quanti. But I think ang sa inyo, walang nag-mixed method, no? Medyo mahirap din kasi yung mixed method most of the time. Ang gumagawa nito yung mga masters nag-EMS. Okay? But for you to know that this research design also exists, let's talk about them. We have different types under the mixed method researches. Then we have convergent parallel, explanatory sequential, and exploratory sequential. So the first one, we have here convergent parallel design. Let me just use the illustration on the next slide para maintindihan natin siya. When you say convergent parallel class, you will be collecting both quali na data, so I'm talking about linguistic data, and at the same time quantitative data, and this on the same phase of research, okay? So at the same time, but they are treated separately from each other. They will be analyzed separately also. So they will be like individual data class for our research. So we will be doing collection and at the same time analysis separately, but at the same single phase of research. Now, after the analysis, we are going to compare the results of the two, and then we will look for divergence and convergence, or if there is contradiction between the numerical data collected and the linguistic data. And then after that, we will be doing the interpretation. So that's how you do the convergent parallel mixed method research design. So we will be treating both data equally, ha. May equal weight sila. Mag-i-interpret, mag-a-analyze and interpret tayo sa quali or sa linguistic na data, mag-i-interpret and analyze din tayo sa quanti, yung numerical data natin, before we'll have an overall interpretation. So we also do that in research. Okay? Na talagang dalawa. Magkakandak tayo, for example, ng survey, tapos mag-i-interview din tayo. Okay? Mas maraming data yung makokollect natin. Now, if we cannot do a convergent parallel design, we may also do explanatory sequential. So from the term itself, sequential, we will be doing the collection and analysis in sequence, starting with the quantitative data collection and analysis. So you will start first with the quanti, and you will be giving priority to this one. Okay? Tapos, after analyzing the quanti, the numerical data, we will be doing a follow-up. How are we going to do that? We will be collecting qualitative data, okay, or our linguistic data. And we will be using our linguistic data to explain our results sa quanti. Kaya siya tinatawag na explanatory sequential. Again, we will have a two-phase here, ha? Two-phase design. Quanti muna. Tapos, depende sa result sa quanti, gagawa tayo ng interview guide. Okay? Tapos, Pag meron na tayong interview guide based on the result of the quanti, magkakandak tayo ng interview, magko-collect tayo ng linguistic or qualitative data. Pag meron na, gagamitin natin again yung result ng quali to explain the results natin sa quanti. So our priority is actually the quantitative data. So para ma-picture out niyo siya, let's have an example. We have here a survey sa mga caregiver sa kanilang attitude towards the elderly population. Tapos, nag-survey no, syempre we have numerical data after the survey. After the survey, yung findings class ng research na ito, merong high degree of like stereotyping itong mga caregivers sa mga elderly, especially in the issues of race and gender. Now, pag hindi kasi siya ma-explain ng researcher bakit kaya mataas yung kanilang stereotyping, pwede tayong mag-interview. So, yun, yung ating interview is based on the result of the quantitative data collected. So, we will ask them bakit mataas yung stereotyping nila. So, pag meron na tayong linguistic data, gagamitin na natin ngayon yung answer nila in the interview sa pag-explain doon sa salient results sa quantitative data collected. Okay, that's how you do class an explanatory sequential mixed method research design. Okay, and lastly, we have the exploratory sequential. So sequence pa rin, we will still have two phases here. Other name for exploratory sequential is instrument development design. So our purpose actually is to explore first the phenomenon or the situation before we can come up with an instrument. Or when I say instrument, I'm talking about, example, a questionnaire here. Okay? So we actually do this. For example, wala talaga tayong mahanap na questionnaire para makakollect tayo ng numerical data. So mag-i-interview muna tayo para meron tayong background information about our population or our respondents or our situation. Okay? So ginagawa din natin ito pag yung variables natin, wala talaga tayong background information, wala tayong models, wala tayong guides. So yun yung ginagawa sa exploratory sequential. Mauuna si Quali, mag-i-interview muna for the sake of collecting like background information about our topic, and we will be using that information to build or to make an instrument for us to collect the quantitative data. So after that, if we have collected now the quantitative data, we will be doing the interpretation. So let me give you an example. We have here a study about the comparison between the practices of the rural and the urban settlers' attitude towards COVID-19. So for example, wala talaga tayong background information or wala tayong alam kung ano bang ginagawa ng mga residents doon sa urban areas when it comes to preventing the transmission of COVID-19. And at the same time, pwede na din tayong mag-interview kung ano din yung ginagawa sa mga rural areas. So we will have an SOP number 1. Ito yung yung qualitative na part. Aansweran natin what are the practices of rural and urban settlers to control the transmission of COVID-19. We will answer this via interview. Now, after collecting this information, we may use them in making our questionnaire now. Para masagot natin yung question number 2, is there a significant difference in the level of practices of rural and urban settlers to control the transmission of COVID-19? Okay? Kasi we cannot do the comparison if we only have linguistic data. So we will just use the data for us to be able to make a questionnaire, and that we can measure now their level of practices, and at the same time, we can compare objectively, okay, using statistical tools. Okay, this is again an example of exploratory sequential design. Exploratory kasi we will have to explore first information about what we are studying, no, yung ating topic, ating situation or phenomenon before we can have the numerical data. So it's the opposite of the explanatory sequential. Okay, so those are the types class of the mixed method research design. So if you are not doing this now, maybe someday, for example, you want to pursue your master's or like you want to proceed sa clean farm or even in medicine kasi there is still research there, you may be asked to do a mixed method research. So this is one step higher compared to our undergraduate studies that we will just focus with either quali or quantity. Okay? Sige. Questions? That is done. That is all for our research designs. So you have to be careful, class, in identifying what research design are you going to use. So some of you will be using quantitative descriptive research design, but you have to be specific what type of descriptive research design will it be. Or kung experimental naman, talagang ilalagay niyo under sa research design kung anong klaseng experimental yon. So isa-isa mo talaga your study, sample research design. This study will utilize quantitative through experimental research design. Specifically, anong research design yon? Post-test only ba o kaya pre-test and post-test or Solomon for group design? And then you will explain after what's the meaning of quantitative, ano yung description ng through experimental, and what does it mean when you say like post-test control only or pre-test and post-test. I-explain mo yun sila lahat and sa paper mo under the research design sa methodology. Okay? So that's it. Now, let's move on. I still have time, right? It's 5:50. I still have more than 30 minutes. So let's move on to our research local. Okay, this is the next subsection for our methodology. Research local, from the name itself, local, we are talking about the place here or the area or the site where we are going to conduct our study. Most likely, it will be on the data gathering. Okay, saan natin i-gather yung data natin. Now, if our place for the data gathering is an institution, you have to provide class a description of the institution, including its mission, vision, and objective or goals. Okay, so before we'll move on to the research technique, let me show you an example of a research local. Ayaw. Why? Wait lang. Look at my email ha, kasi all the researches are here in the email. So, what was that again? Let's try to look first for an example. I just don't know if this one is like the final manuscript or not, but nevertheless, let's just evaluate later. Okay, so this one is an example of an experimental study. We have here blood sugar lowering activity of formulated tea from Nephelium lapacum rambutan leaves in alloxan-induced diabetic Swiss albino mice. From the title itself, you will really know that this is an experimental research. So let's move on directly to our research or methodology section, ha? Okay. So we have here, excuse me, the methodology section. This is just, class, nasira lang yung format nito, but anyway, it should be here, class. So this will be your methodology. We'll start with an introductory paragraph. Just introduce what the readers should expect in this section of the paper. And then after that, you have the research design. You have to be specific. What research design are you going to use here? And then you have to provide explanation why you have said that your research design is this kind of design. And then again, after that, you will have the research local. So as you can see, they conducted their experimentation at the pharmacy laboratory 2 of GSD-MSFI. they have to be clear with that kasi dyan talaga sila nag-conduct ng experiment. But it's not just about the name of the institution, but you have to provide also this one. Okay? Like description ng doctors. Ano ba yung doctors? And ano yung, pwede din kayong mag-add ng, again, mission, vision, and objectives. And then aside from that, this one actually is not edited no kasi may hanging page sila. But nevertheless, okay lang yan kasi it's a small thing when it comes to the format. And then aside from that, for experimental research, hindi lang isa yung magiging research local ninyo. Pwedeng dalawa, pwedeng tatlo, depending on the study. So, ibig sabihin ko, even the place where you get your plant material should be divulged here in the research local. Okay, so for the plant material class, you are not allowed to just buy your plant material sa palengke. That's not it. That's not acceptable for research. So you really have to look for a specific area where you can get a lot of your plant material. And kasi we have to consider also the soil type, the variations, genetics ng ating plant material. Magkakaiba kasi magkakaroon kasi ng variation kapag kaiba-iba yung sources ninyo. For example, kailangan nyo ng, rambutan, hindi pwedeng nagkuha ka ng leaves sa rambutan in Pulumulok area, tapos nakalbo na yung leaves, yung tree, tapos lilipat ka for example sa Jensen. Hindi kasi dapat ganun in research. So class, those who will be doing experimental research class you should be able to identify a place talaga where you can get all your plant material. So just like this one, they got their rambutan leaves from Kiamba, Sarangani province. And at the same time, tatlo yung kanilang research local kasi kung saan din nila kinuha yung kanilang laboratory animals, kailangan din siyang nakalagay in the research local. So we have here, they got their Swiss albino mice from Barangay Aplaya, Santa Rosa, Laguna. Okay? So yan yung sa experimental research. Medyo marami yung research local. But for descriptive research, so just like this one, wait lang kayo, nagtuyok-tuyok siya. This one is a descriptive research, medical fake news and fear mongering during COVID-19 pandemic, the impact on vaccine confidence among the millennials. Let's look at their methodology section. Okay, wait nga. Diretso ko siya. Ay, wala. Matagal na nun. Sana yun? Ay, nalampas. Okay, so this is the methodology. This is supposedly here on the next page. Nasira lang talaga yung format nito. But then again, just like the first example, you have here the introductory paragraph followed by the research design. I actually like this paper more kasi they have provided the full description of their research design starting from the quantitative method and then moving on to the descriptive research design, and then they have here stated the correlational. This is a more comprehensive paper than the last one I presented to you. And then that is also true for their research local. This one is a good paper in terms of this part here. Their research local kasi was General Santos City. I mean, they are going to do their research sa Jensen talaga. So they really provided here description ng Jensen, saan siya located, even the population size of Jensen, and description on when it comes to the domiciles in Jensen. When I say domiciles, there's some barangay natin. Isa-isa talaga nila yan in their research local. Okay? So it is again, nakadepende sa research. If, for example, mag-focus lang kayo in a certain barangay in Jensen, you will just have to provide a description here about that barangay that you have selected. Okay, but again, for the experimental research, medyo madami-daming research local yun. Aside from the laboratory where you are going to conduct your experiment, you also have to include information on where you are going to get your like things, your animals, your plant materials in research. Okay, that is for the research local. Questions or clarifications? Wala? Sure? Sige. So, I'm expecting na ilan na yun? 2 subsections na yun. Research design and then after that, research local. Na pwede nyo na siyang simulan, gawin. And then the third subsection, again, the third subsection for our methodology should be entitled sampling technique. Okay? Sampling technique ang title ng third subsection ha. Now, what are you going to include here under the sampling technique? You will have to provide a description of the respondents of your study or the participants of your study. Description talaga, you describe them. Who will be your participants? Okay? So, just like this one, wait lang ha. Skip ko lang. Nasaag ang ako ang slide. This should be the next one. Ito yung example ng sampling technique. So we have here the respondents were really identified that the respondents were the members of the Senior Citizens Association of Cabanatuan City. Okay, and then they have provided descriptions of these respondents. And then aside from that, they have identified also the sampling technique that they used. We have here purposive sampling. But anyway, I'll be going to discuss the sampling technique. I don't know if I have discussed that one in your statistics, but let's just have a review if ever na-discuss ko na siya. Okay? Sige. So again, ang title dyan, sampling technique. The first thing that you're going to do is to describe your population. So what is a population? It's actually our universe in our study. Ito yung people, group of people, or your subject in the study, and all of them, class, possess the characteristics that we are looking for. Okay? So just like when you say my population is first-year students enrolled in GSD-MSFI. So sila lahat, yung lahat ng enrolled sa GSD-MSFI tapos first year ang kanilang standing, included siya in your population. So another thing, yung previous example na pinakita ko sa inyo yung sa fear-mongering, yung respondents nila, yung population nila class are millennials in General Santos City. So, syempre, ang hindi millennials, hindi kasali doon. They don't possess the parameter that we are looking for. And then another example, RadTech faculty in GSD-MSFI. And pwede din namang you will be doing a survey with the senior citizens in GenSan. So we have here two kinds of population. The one that can be counted is called the finite population. So just like when you say residents of GenSan, pwedeng i-count yun, di ba? Meron nga tayong census. So meron tayong definite number for that. Again, we call that finite population. And then the infinite population class are those that cannot be counted. So just like example, the stars in the sky, we cannot count that. And the number of people or pedestrians that will cross the street, it will be impossible for us to count that also. So again, infinite population siya. But nevertheless, most of the time, we will be dealing with finite population, okay? So meron talaga tayong specific number for that kasi we can count them. Okay? However, in research, we seldom do population study. When I say population study, talagang lahat ng members ng population will be included in your research. That's population study. Pero meron tayong mga reasons why we don't do such thing. Most of the time, we do sampling. Okay? So when you say sample, it's just a portion of the population. I-take out natin siya from the population and they will become representative. Okay? They will just become representative. Now, why do we do sampling? Number one, it will be very expensive for us to do a population study. Imagine reaching, example, residents of General Santos City. Ilan na ba tayo ngayon dito sa GenSan? Example, 1 million tayo or more than that. Example lang ha, kasi I don't know the entire population sa Jensen. So that will be very expensive for us to reach out all the 1 million and have them answer our questionnaire. And at the same time, it will take a lot of time for us to finish everything. So hindi tayo makakagraduate niyan, class. Lahat ng efforts ng time and the budget that we have, medyo imposible if we're going to do population study. So we will just opt to do sampling. Okay, kaya siya tinawag na sampling technique. Kasi we will be explaining sa readers natin how we did the sampling, paano natin sinelect yung samples natin, yung representatives natin from the population. Okay? Anyway, since they are taken from the population, our samples can really be representative and that we can use the data we have collected from them to make inferences or generalizations or even projections. Okay? Pwede natin silang gawing representative. Okay. Now, here are the steps in sampling. Okay, listen yung, especially yung magkakandak ng survey, you will be doing this one. So, number one, you really have to identify your population. Sino ba talaga target natin? Kung magkakandak tayo ng survey, sino yung target natin na mag-answer ng ating questionnaire? Will it be the millennials in Gensan or it will be the whole Gensan, so that will be residents in Gensan? Or kung saan man, pwede din namang population mo is yung residents ng Barangay Kalumpang. That is still a population, okay? So but you really have to be clear with that. Now, pag na-identify nyo na yung population, you determine the required sample size. So we may do computations here just for us to know. So at the end of the of the discussion, I hope wala na mag-asa sa akin, ma'am, so kadaghan ng amo ang hatagan sa questionnaire, ma'am. Kasi I'll be teaching you now how to do or how to compute the sample size. Ha? And then after that, pag na-compute nyo na, that's the time you select your sample. So again, how do we compute for the sample size? We may use this one class. We call this the Slovin's formula. We may use this one kasi marami tayong way in computing the sample size. However, ito yung mostly ginagamit. This is our formula. Let me just correct this one. This is, this is squared here. Okay, squared yan siya ha. This is small letter n equals capital letter N divided by 1 plus capital letter N E squared. E squared yan siya. So small letter n is your sample size. Your capital letter N is the population size. And letter E there is the margin of error. So that will be a minimum of 5%. Remember, this will just be a sample. So you will not be taking all the members of the population. Therefore, it will be good for us to leave a room for error. Okay, mag-expect talaga tayo na we will not get the 100% na correct data. Okay, but the minimum is just 5%. So, let's have a sample computation. Please bear with my handwriting. I was not able to bring my tablet pen. Now, example, you want to conduct a survey sa residents sa Barangay Kalumpang. Example lang ito ha, 20,000. I don't know the population. Maliit lang actually ang 20,000, but nevertheless, example lang naman siya. So we will compute for the sample size. So among the 20,000, ilan ba yung ating kukunin na sample? Yung bibigyan natin ng questionnaire. So this is again 20,000 here. Okay. Divided by 1 plus 20,000. Kasi that's still capital letter N. Ngitas akong agi. And then E squared. So again, our minimum margin of error is 5%. So that will be equivalent to 0.05. And then square mo siya. Okay. Let me just get my calculator. Okay. So Let's do the math. So this is 20,000 here. 20,000 na ha. Kama na, kama. Okay. And then 1 plus 20,000. Dali na din ako mag-kulay pen. Okay. 20,000 and then let's square this one. Ako pa yung multiply. This is 0.025. Magamit pa dyan calculator. This is 0. Ulitin to. 0. Oy. Deleted ko. Kamala magsulat there yung wala pen. This is period class. 0.0025. Kindly check. Nadi ko trust issue sa mental math. Yeah, that's correct. 0.025. And then, may I continue here on this side? I don't have enough space na. So this will be 20,000 divided by 1 plus 20,000 times 0.0025, that is 50, right? Kindly check sa calcio. Ito na lang. Wala mo nagatingog. 20,000 times 0.0025. Yeah, that's 50. Okay. And then, 20,000. Ay, ulit. 20,000 divided by 51. Le answer ani 392. 20,000 divided by 51. Yeah, it's 392.16. However, class, you cannot make a survey sa 0.16 na tao, no? So we will be rounding this off. Okay, so this will just, or nearest whole number. So this will just be 392. Okay, so that's how you compute for your sample size. If you have a population of 20,000 people, you will just be having the data gathering sa 392 katao. This is through the use of Sloven's formula. Questions or clarifications? I will be including this in your exam, so you really have to compute, ha. So during sa exam natin sa research, please bring your calculator o dili mo gusto mag-mental math. Pag mag-mental math mo nga. And then, dagko nga number akong ihatag. Okay? Wala question? Wala question? I'll be teaching you another way sa pag-determine ng sample size. So, please open your Google. Automatic ito. You don't need to compute. So, sa Google, all you need to open is your Rausoft calculator. Just type sa Google class Rausoft calculator, and then you will be seeing this one, www.rausoft.com. This is actually a software, a sample size calculator. So open nyo lang yan siya, and you will see this one. This is also allowed, ha. Kung ayaw nyo mag-compute, you can do the Rausoft thing. Okay, so leave the margin of error 5% kasi this one is our minimum and this is the most common choice na 5% parate yung margin of error, and definitely ang A1, 95% we are confident. So like we call this the confidence level. And then dito mo i-input yung sample size class. Okay, and then itong response distribution, leave this as 50%. This is to ensure that we have normal distribution of our data. So that is just again 50%. Tapos again, i-input mo dito yung population size, and then pag na-input mo na siya, you will have here the recommended sample size. So let's just have the 20,000 pa rin. So ano yung recommended sample size here? It's 377. So there is a slight difference between the Rausoff and the Slogin's formula. Kanina sa Slogin's formula, it's 392. Dito naman 377. But nevertheless, both are accepted. It's just that you have to like be specific also or divulge in your paper kung ano yung ginamit nyo in the computation of the sample size. Okay? Para klaro-klaro. Okay, if you opt to use this one, you really have to include in your paper that in computing the sample size, you use the Rausoft software. Okay, and this will be under the sampling technique. Okay, after giving a description about your respondents, isunod nyo yung pag-compute nyo ng inyong sample size. Okay, again, that's 377. Okay, do you have questions? This is for the sample size determination. So again, itong E dyan is error. It's our allowable room for error class, yung ina-allow natin na non-precision since we are just using samples and we are not doing a population study. Okay? Excuse me? Walay pangutana? So kung wala, we will move on to the sampling techniques. Under pa rin ito sa sampling techniques, the title of the subsection is sampling techniques. But for the first part of the sampling technique, respondents muna. You identify your respondents and then you give description to your respondents. Tapos, you will have, kung meron kayong sample size, you have to include the way you computed your sample size. Tapos, after sa sample size will be the sampling technique. Okay, what sampling technique are you going to use? Yeah. Okay. Chain drugstore. So, iba-iba na pharmacy branch. You really have to determine how many branches of pharmacy yung dyan sa pharmacy na isa-survey ninyo. And then, you will compute using that total number. Okay? Kasi may basis kasi lahat. Hindi pwede class sa research na manghula ka lang na gusto ko mag-conduct ng survey sa 10 tao. Hindi ganun. Okay? Kasi at the end of the research, you will be making conclusion. And you cannot make one if your sample is not really a representative of the population. Diba? Your example, your population is 1 million tapos 10 tao ka lang gumawa ng survey. Paano mo magagawang conclusion yun? 10 tao lang sila. It's the reason we really compute for the sample size. And we really need to make sure they will be representative. Yeah. The sample size is yung kailangan mong bigyan ng questionnaire. Okay? Papasagutan mo. So just like if the population of the barangay is 20,000, you will just look for the 300. If you use the Slogin's formula, you will just look for 392 people who will answer your questionnaire. Yun yung tinatawag na sample size. Ano hilak naman? Oh, trabaho pa na ninyo siya. You have to look for the total number of pharmacy that you are going to study. Okay? Now, for the sampling technique, most of the time, gumagamit sila ng rule of thumb method wherein hindi sila talaga may mga researchers na hindi sila nagko-compute ng sample size using the Slogin's formula and the Rausoft software. Minsan nagko-compute lang sila using the 20%. So if they know the population already, they will just take out the 20% and yun na yung magiging sample nila. Ang problema natin, if you only just use 20%, wala tayong statement of validity. Hindi natin ma-explain bakit 20%, bakit hindi 30%. Ganun, di ba? Walang statement for validity. And at the same time, yung findings of the study, hindi din siya, wala din tayong statement for validity. Merong naga-census. I don't know. I don't know actually. I think you can access that sa FDA kasi all the drugstores will register, di ba, sa FDA. So sila yung may control niyan kung ilang pharmacy na yung nasa Gensan na area. I just don't know how are you going to contact FDA about that, or meron ba silang website? Pero meron naman tayong class FDA dito sa regional office ng FDA natin, kaya lang nasa Marbel. Pero I think you can email them kasi I really think nasa kanila yung data niyan. What if enrolled lang sa community pharmacy? Yeah, actually it's up to you. It's up to you. You ask your CI if your CI, your advisor, kung gusto niya ba sampling or gusto niya population na study. Kasi kung 30 lang naman yung kung 30 lang naman yung enrolled in the community pharmacy internship, I think you can do the population study, include them all. Pwede yun. Para at least 100%, we will not have rooms for errors na kasi 100% talaga yung respondent ninyo. Population study ang tawag dyan. We will just do the sampling if we have a lot of like population members ng population, like umabot na ng million kana, di na yun na siya posible. Pero kung 30 lang ang na-enroll, pag population study na lang. Population study na lang. Kasi last time, may nag-conduct ng survey last year na study sa MedTech, and their study was about the coping mechanism of the senior high school students. Tapos parang grade 11 lang ba yun or grade 12? So parang hindi umabot ng 100 siguro. So ang panel, ang suggestion nila is population study na lang. So they included all the grade 12 students, senior high school students sa doctors. Sige, kung less than 100 lang naman, just do population study. Bigyan nyo na sila lahat ng questionnaire. Unless na lang kung kayo yan, like yung ang enrolled sa community pharmacy is kayo, kasama kayo, researcher, i-minus nyo yung sarili nyo dyan. Hindi kayo kasama sa sasagot sa questionnaire, syempre, kasi to be ironic, ikaw ang gumawa, ikaw din ang sasagot, diba? That will be bias. Bias yan siya. So kung kasali kayo sa supposedly respondent kasi kasali kayo sa population, i-minus niyo yung sarili niyo, ha? Lahat kayo researchers sa group, hindi kayo kasali. Sila lang. Okay, classmates niya lang, hindi kayo kasali class. Okay? Now for descriptive, normative, and research survey, we will be doing a central limit theorem wherein if the population is not really that large, so for example 200 lang, you can have 50%, at least 50% or more than 50% as sample. Okay, i-consider nyo siya para you can use parametric testing in statistics. So, di ba, you are done with your statistics. Nag-learn na tayo what's the difference between parametric and non-parametric, di ba, testing sa stat. Like if your data is normally distributed, you will have a bell-shaped graph. If you're going to graph them, we use the parametric statistics. And at the same time, if you have like interval data, now, that is important kasi we treat the parametric statistics higher compared to the non-parametric. So included dyan yung gaano karami yung sample size mo. So if your sample size is less than 50 but more than 30, you may consider doing a parametric statistical testing, but there will be a limitation in terms of the interpretation. So it may be for the sample alone. However, if your sample size is really less than 30%, masyadong konti, and non-probability sampling ka pa talaga, like you do purposive sampling, walang randomization na nangyari, most likely you will be doing a parametric testing, and at the same time, your interpretation will be limited in your samples only. You cannot give a generalization or conclusion with the whole population. Okay? So di ba we have two kinds of sampling technique. Pwedeng probability sampling, pwedeng non-probability. I think nung nag-learn tayo ng statistics, pinaulit-ulit ko to sa inyo define sa quiz man or sa exam. I just hope hindi kayo nag-google. Kasi pag nag-google lang kayo during that time, during my quiz and the exam, di ka tumusulod sa inyong huna-huna. But nevertheless, let's just have a review. When you say probability sample, these samples are actually taken from the population, but we give them equal chance. So all the members of the population will have equal chance to be selected in the study. So this is what we call random samples, or in the technique, we call that random sampling, okay, or probability sampling. And we consider a random sample or a probability sample as the best representative for our population kasi we get rid of the bias or biases. Therefore, the findings that we can get using the probability sampling will be valid, and we can use the findings or the data to make inferences or to make good conclusions or generalizations about our population. Now, if we don't give the members of the population equal chance to be selected or chosen in our study, we call that non-probability sampling technique. So the sample is called non-probability sample. Okay? Now, since we cannot ensure that the biases are like neutralized in the study, then this may not be called a representative of the population. Okay? Hindi magiging representative pag ang ginawa natin is non-probability sampling. So we may not do also, or we may not make inferences also about the characteristic of a population if we only do non-probability sampling. So I will just end here since it's almost 6:30. Next meeting, after the intrams, we will have quizzes. Marami tayong quizzes class. Kaya ang RRL, wala pa nag-quiz. Tapos ang methodology pa. So I'll be giving you lots of quizzes after the intrams. And then my quizzes will be up to here sa non-probability sample. And then after the quizzes class, we will be talking about the different types of both probability sampling techniques. Review na lang siguro ito kasi tapos naman na tayo nito sa statistics. And then also the non-probability sampling techniques. And that will be the end of the midterms. Okay? What specific date? Yung date talaga after the intrams. Yung naiwan natin na meeting after the intramurals.